Hello friends, how are you? My name is Ari Thurger and today I'm going to tell you what Asatru is. Today I'm going to be completely neutral, impartial about this subject. I won't say if I agree or disagree with the subject and the way things are religiously conducted. I will be in the position of putting my spiritual and philosophical beliefs aside and solely focus on the understanding of this neo-pagan religion, Asatru. I will divide this video into two parts. First, I will tell you what Asatru is, and that's it. As I have said, taking an impartial position, only being interested in briefly explain the foundations of this religion. And on the second part, I will show you a book, talk a bit about it, which I think it's a good resource for those who are taking the first steps into this neo-pagan religion, or for those academics who are interested in studying and understanding modern religions. With this being said, let's get started. Asatru is the name created by the followers of the Nordic neo-pagan religion during the 19th century to designate the modern reconstruction of the religious traditions of Scandinavia before the introduction of Christianity. The name roughly translated means to be true to the Aesir, one of the tribes of Norse gods, which during this time in the 19th century meant to be true to the Norse gods in general, to be faithful and worship the Norse gods. But with the increasing knowledge about pre-Christian Scandinavian pagan traditions and with the creation of other branches of this faith, Asatru also became the term to refer to a religion much more focused on the Aesir. When you hear people say that Asatru is an ancient religion older than Christianity since prehistoric times, people are not referring to the Asatru, the modern religious reconstruction, but to the set of religions and spiritualities which springs from the specific spiritual beliefs of Northern Europe. Obviously, our Norse ancestors did not refer to their religions as Asatru. This religion was revived as Asatru in the 19th century, although it received a special boost in the late 1960s and early 1970s when Sveinbjörn Hjaltason was the instrumental figure in getting Asatru recognized by the Icelandic government in 1973. And from that moment on, several organizations started to appear all over Europe and in North America. And nowadays, Asatru has hundreds of followers all over the world, especially organizations in the United States and Europe. And in Europe, in certain countries, it is recognized as an official religion. In Asatru, there is a great emphasis of the Norse myths, although they are not seen as historical truths, mainly guiding lines in how we should conduct our lives in order to achieve greatness and enjoy this world, enjoy life, taking the best advantage of everything that surrounds us. And as such, the gods are often seen as part of nature and often manifest themselves through nature. And we humans have an intimate relationship with them. Although it's necessary to point out that we are also on our own, and we only communicate with the gods for help when all human efforts and resources have been spent and there is no other option. Because when worshipping the Norse gods, a gift calls for a gift, and so sacrifices must be made, often in the form of ceremonies when the community shares with the gods personal objects, food, drink, etc., to maintain the bonds of friendship strong between us and the gods. Asatru adheres to the Scandinavian pagan belief that objects play an important role in the religious connection with the gods. The gods can infuse objects with power. There is a flow of energy which lies within all things. For instance, we create something, we bend our thought, our will to it, we give it shape, and so we give a part of ourselves to the object. It is infused with our essence. This can be given to the gods as an offering, and in turn the gods are obliged to give something in return, in the form of energy, an exchange of essence which will help us to live life on our own, of course, but use that energy as a source of strength and enthusiasm. We require this force, which is something beyond human understanding, but infuses with power. The spiritual reality is affected by us, and in turn it affects us. And the spiritual reality expresses itself in the form of gods and goddesses. The Asatru organizations are known as kindred. The priests and priestesses of a kindred are known as Gothar, the plural form of Gothi or Geithia. So the Gothar are the collective priesthood of the Asatru community. And the congregations are known as folk. This is an important aspect of this religion because, like many pagan religions, it's turned to the community, the importance of each individual in the community. All together form a unified force that acts for the benefit of the entire group, to ensure protection, fertility, prosperity, well-being, so that the community stays strong and endures. The ceremonies performed within the kindred are known as lots, and the altars on which the blood or sacrifice is performed is known as stoli. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I feel the need to reinforce what I said in the beginning. I will remain neutral on this video. I'm not here to tell you what I do, what are my spiritual ideas. Therefore, I'm here to tell you what is done in Asatru and what this religion stands for. For people to become Gothar, the priests and priestesses of this religion, the person must possess three things: the wisdom of Odin, the strength of Thor, and the love of Freya. These are the three main deities of Asatru, highly worshipped. These three aspects are often expressed by possessing sacred texts, be part of a kindred, and care for the folk, guiding the kindred with wisdom, being strong for the community, and work for the benefit of the community, which also requires a certain amount of love, friendship, and compassion for the members of the community. The Gothar also need certain items to perform the rituals, like the hammer of Thor, for instance, an oath ring, and focus much of the religious work on the Havamal, on the teachings of the High One, Odin. The Havamal is not seen as a definite holy text. The Havamal is a poem that establishes the guidelines of Asatru, and there are other sources of knowledge, of course, but often used, but the Havamal is a very important poem in the modern religious structure of Asatru. And mind that I'm talking about Asatru, the modern reconstruction, and not the pre-Christian Scandinavian religions. In Asatru there is also an annual high council known as the Hothing that sets the bylaws that the folk must follow. The Thing speakers, the main voices of the council, must be chosen by their kindred, and their attendance is mandatory. And like many modern pagan reconstructions, this is a religion that shapes itself to our modern needs. And as such, many Asatru organizations may do things differently, but the canons of this religion, the basics, are the ones I've just mentioned. Of course, nowadays there are many branches of the pre-Christian Scandinavian beliefs that are completely different from this 19th century religious reconstruction. There is a wondrous variety of modern spiritualities based on Northern European pagan traditions. Asatru is the most famous neo-pagan branch, and although there are clear differences from organization to organization, the foundations of this religion still cling to the 19th century religious reconstruction. And indeed, the gods people worship in this religion are mainly the Aesir, such as Odin, Thor, Tyr, Balder, and also two Vanir, Freyr and Freya. The other gods are seldom heard of or are simply not included because the main focus is on the Eddas, on these historical sources, which are works that reinforce the importance of the Aesir and a very few of the Vanir gods. So in Asatru, either the organizations focused solely on the Aesir or the ones focused on the gods in general divide the gods into two parts, or two groups, the same way the Eddas divide the gods. The Aesir, who are the predominant group, sky gods, war gods, law, justice, poetry, wisdom, more focused on social realities and the need to maintain order, and the Vanir, some of whom have been adopted into the Aesir, but are gods more concerned with fertility, prosperity, plenty, and magic. So this is what Asatru is, a neo-pagan polytheistic reconstruction based on certain religious and historical aspects of pre-Christian Scandinavia, a modern rebirth of the pre-Christian indigenous faith of the Norse peoples. Nevertheless, it's important to refer that the believers of this faith attempt to interact with the Norse gods, and in addition they recognize that other people have their own gods. So by no means do the followers of Asatru believe that their gods are the only true gods. It is a religion or a reconstruction of a religious tradition without a hierarchical structure, dogmas or sacred books being the center of the entire religion. And as such, the religious practices may suffer a lot of changes and different interpretations according to the social environment in which they are inserted. Now, for the second part of this video, I would like to show you a book, which I think is a good resource for those who are taking the first steps into Asatru. And I assure you, even if in the long run you won't have any spiritual beliefs connected to Norse pagan traditions, even if you come up with the conclusion that this is not the spiritual path that suits you, this will definitely help you to extend your spiritual horizons and have a better understanding of other spiritual realities, which in turn will help you to take that step ahead, go over the fence, and slowly leave behind the non-pagan religious ideas you grew up with. This is the book Essential Asatru by Diana Paxton. I've read this book more than a decade ago on another lifetime, and of course I've read this again to be able to speak about it on this video, and the knowledge I have today is definitely not the same I had back then, and thank the gods for that, or I was clearly doing something wrong with my life if I still held to the same understanding of the world. Well, anyway, as I've said, this is a very good source for all of those who want to know more about this neo-pagan religion, or for academics who study the alternative contemporary religions. It's a good source that shows the nature of Asatru, and the book is divided into 3 parts. First, showing an educated historical balance of the first Germanic pagans all the way to the Viking Age, and then their Christianization. Secondly, a general idea of the major deities and cosmology of the Norse religion during medieval times. And finally, Diana Paxton, she speaks about the rituals and practices in paganism nowadays. The general idea of this book is to cover as much as possible the information about the pagan religious practices using the main surviving documentary sources, literary sources, which are the Poetic Edda, a set of poetic works composed at the end of the Viking Age but put to parchment during the feudal Christian period of Scandinavia, the Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, and the Icelandic sagas, which is a prose work between the 13th and the 14th centuries. But she also makes references to academic works of people specialized in the study of the original pagan traditions, which is good to reinforce certain aspects and also to demystify certain common errors about the Old Norse pagan practices. In this book, the majority of the historical references are correct, except a few points here and there, but not a big deal if your objective is to learn about Asatru as a modern religion. Although I must point this out. In magical aspects, she affirms that a general term for magic in Old Norse is gande, but actually the most common term in the sources is actually fjölkuning, which is very similar to the word kulning, an ancient Norwegian and Swedish herd call, to call livestock, a type of song with a high-pitched vocal technique which reinforces the idea of using the voice in ancient Scandinavian magic. not the pronunciation of words or speaking incantations, but the sound of words, the sound as a magical vibration. Whilst Gand or Gandra is a reference to wand or spirit, which is quite different. Paxton differentiates Wicca from Asatru, which is an interesting point, and she considers that the Germanic pagan tradition is much more focused in traditions and religious practices of the community, in which magic has a secondary role. On this point, I must disagree, and actually the great majority of academics and researchers, such as myself, share a similar idea as mine. Asatru is clearly different from Wicca, but that's not the point. The point is, what she affirms, in truth, it's precisely the opposite of what she said. The religious practices during the Viking Age were characterized by a great insertion of magic, both in daily life and public life, to the point that it is almost impossible to separate the two realities. Religion in ancient Scandinavia had a lot of magic. She also speaks about a very delicate and controversial subject which affects every neo-pagan, the relation between ethnicity, culture and nationality. The question is, someone who isn't from Scandinavia or even European can practice Asatru? And she also speaks about the modern struggle of neo-pagans coming from Christian families, having been raised with Christian values, and how hard it is to break the connections with those religious traditions and then moving to pagan ones. The problem with social acceptance, etc. Interesting points she refers, which I will not discuss it in here. You will be the judge of that if you read the book with an open mind. So without a doubt, it's an interesting book for those who are taking the first steps into Asatru and want to know more about this neo-pagan religion based on pre-Christian Scandinavian traditions. Alright friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and well, thank you so much for watching and see you on the next one. Tack för idag!